because it's 10 o'clock. Here we go. Hello and welcome to Collapse Club, where our topic is how are we to live in the time of collapse? I'm David Baum in Seattle. I'm joined today by Wendy Freeman, my colleague from Portugal. Hello, Wendy.
Hi, David.
And together, Wendy and I are joined by Saber Freeman. Saber is an 18-year-old student in Pretoria, South Africa. Hello, Saber, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Our topic today is responsibility, and my particular interest is talking to a young person who is looking forward to taking their share of responsibility for the world as we go forward in these challenging times. Wendy, maybe you'd like to describe your relationship with Saber and then begin our conversation.
Sure, David. So I've participated in some of these conversations previously, talking around my view of collapse. But I think what's become very clear is that we older folk, and I 100% include myself here, have certain views on what's going to happen with collapse, who's responsible for collapse, who's responsible for preparing and adapting to it. But when I deal with Saber, who is my niece, Sabrina-Gabriel Freeman, who lives in South Africa with her mother, my sister, I realize that you're seeing it from a very different perspective. I mean, I'm 57 this year and you've just turned 18. So there's a whole raft of issues and questions for you to think about that that are in my past. So I think we're very curious to hear, how do you feel about collapse? How do you see that in your future from the position where you are now, just entering university? Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about your decision making recently. I know you've had to make some major changes in your plan.
Yeah, so in terms of collapse and just looking at this kind of existential view of the world, which is very real, it is quite scary. And I know that I'm not the only one who experiences this. And I remember a few years ago, there was this boy in our grade, and he was really not the nicest person at all. But he said something that stuck with me, and I've thought about it a lot over and over. And he said, we were talking about sort of the injustices in the world, abuse and feminism and all these things. And he said, I'd rather just not think about that sort of thing. And at the time, I was still like in that early activism mode, and I was like, no, how can you think like that? You need to be aware about this. And in a way, like, you do, and you should, and it's very good if you are. But I can understand the need and the desire to sometimes just cut off from that and not be aware of all the horrible tragedies that we are constantly told about through news and social media and so on, because it gets really scary and really terrifying and really draining. And if you spend too much time on social media watching all these things, hearing about the collapse and the inevitable decline of civilization and humanity, it is completely draining. And I think a lot of my friends, a lot of my peers, we often take breaks from social media because of this, and we all feel quite terrified because we want to live this normal life and we want to fulfill all our dreams and aspirations, but the entire time in the back of our mind, it's this, what about climate collapse? What are you doing to save the world? Because you're going to be the ones who have to live through it. So yeah, it is definitely a part of our daily life.
And what is it that has brought you to the point of choosing to attend to this rather than take refuge in ignorance?
So I've always been, I don't know, from a young age, I have felt quite passionate about the environment, about the natural world. I live in South Africa, and we often went on many game drives. We were often exposed to the natural world and just to the beauty of nature. So I think, like, I grew up with a great respect, admiration for nature. I always loved it, appreciated it. And when you start hearing about all the horrible things that humans do to our environment, from like 10 years old, 12 years old, it angered me. It made me really upset, and I couldn't understand it as a young child. So it's always been close to my heart, and it is definitely like it's not something that I can just step away from. I can't live my life and just pursue something that, like, one of my hobbies. I can't just go into acting or something else that is fun for me, but the entire time I will be haunted by the thought that I'm not doing more to save the environment.
So, Saber, if we think about our topic that we chose, responsibility, I know that you've been vegetarian or in fact vegan for quite a lot of your, and I want to say quite a lot of your adult life, or since you were a young teenager. That's been your choice. I mean, that's very much been a. You want to talk a little bit about how?
Yeah, because my mom was vegetarian for very similar, or is vegetarian for very similar reasons to me, just very much anti-animal abuse. So I was exposed to that from a young age. And then when I was about 13, I decided to go vegetarian. And about 2 years after that, I never thought I would, but I decided to go vegan, because the more you learn about the abuse that happens in farms and so on in the animal agriculture industry, it is quite horrific, quite horrifying. And I would never ask anyone to go and actually watch some of the things that happen, because it's like it's out of a horror story. It breaks my heart. So if I can in any way in my daily life not contribute to that industry, I will. And if that's going to be through my diet and the products that I consume, I would much rather not support that sort of abuse.
I think, sorry, David, I have a quick question in relation to, it's quite interesting that you've taken this responsibility. I mean, I know your mom, my sister, has been vegetarian, wow, a very long time. I think probably from the same sort of age that you started. What I'm curious about for other people is, where do you get your information? Because I know at home, I mean, my mom, your grandmother, and your mom don't really sort of put documents in front of you saying what's going on. You've actually sought that information yourself. And I think this is something that people don't actually realize, how much of that information is available. You're certainly not getting it off the national news in South Africa, are you?
So I think for me personally, when I am on Instagram, it's mainly for news. There are certain news websites that I follow. Some are specific to South Africa, like the Daily Maverick. Others are worldwide, like Vice News. And to be honest, I get a lot of my news through people's WhatsApp statuses. They'll often just post screenshots of articles that they found online through whatever sites that they've used, and then I'll find it interesting and I'll go do my own research on it. I also have friends in school who had to, that they took economics or something like that, and they would have to keep up with like the daily news. So they would listen to daily podcasts from the BBC, and that's how they would keep up with their news. So there are many different ways that I think my generation kind of follows the news, and it's a lot through Instagram. Sometimes it's through TikTok, WhatsApp statuses, podcasts, YouTube. And the thing is, I think we are all very much aware of the fact that we can't always trust like a TikTok or a WhatsApp status. So often when we do see this thing, we will go and do our own further research on it.
You mentioned being vegan. That's a personal choice, and you're trying to make an effect within your personal life. There is a big discussion in the collapse aware community about the relationship between personal actions and personal changes, and then making change in the world. When you look forward, do you see yourself working in the larger society, and what possibility do you see there?
So I definitely make choices in my daily life that are for, there are personal choices that I, as you say, it's like veganism and so on. I feel it's my responsibility to do what I can to help the environment, to not contribute to this abuse of animals. But throughout my life, I think for a while, I've always done speeches and spoken about topics that are really close to me and really personal to me. And in that, I've tried to alter the opinions of people. So from about grade 6, grade 7, I've spoken about topics relating to environmentalism, feminism, abuse, veganism. And I've just through leading by example and just by sharing my perspective, I try to alter other people's opinions, or just at least show them another side, introduce them to another way of thinking. And that's also what I try to do with my blog, is I write about personal stories and my personal perspective on something, but I try to show someone, this is another way of thinking. Have you looked at it like this? These are the personal choices that I make. And if you want to, you could make them too. And this is perhaps the impact that it would have.
Do you find that you are swimming against the stream? Is there a lot of recalcitrance or inertia that you have to combat when you're engaged in that kind of speaking out?
Definitely sometimes. Because when I write, or when I write speeches or for my blog, it often comes with like a wave of creativity. But at other times, I feel completely run down by just the sheer enormity of some of the issues that I'm speaking about. And it's almost like writer's block that is brought on by this existentialism that goes on in my head. And I think, how on earth is my little blog that gets around 100 views ever going to alter the states of reality? But I do still have a passion for it, and I do still enjoy writing and speaking and just having these conversations with people. So I think that's what keeps pushing me forward. And just the fact that I would never be able to sit back and do nothing about it when I look at this. As much as it sometimes paralyzes me, it also pushes me into action.
Hey, but there was a story that I forgot to check with you that I heard, I think through your mom, about a change in the uniform. So you went to a school in South Africa that's part of a bigger group, and you guys changed the uniforms that people are wearing or what they're allowed to wear in school?
I mean, I'm not sure. My school was quite progressive, and we were part of a larger group. I'm sure I can say the name online.
You were at that school, sure.
So I belonged to Curo, and then my smaller school was a Curo school. And we were quite progressive compared to the other ones. But Curo, their whole idea was they wanted to make the uniform the same across all Curo schools. But our school was also a place of experimentation. So one of the things that they were trying to introduce was a uniform for students who are gender fluid or non-binary. And they wanted to, they were asking us as students, like, what sort of reforms would you put through and what sort of changes would you make? Because what happened one time, my partner and I at the time, we went together, but we were honestly just joking around. And for a few days, we ended up switching uniforms. So they wore my skirt and I wore their pants. And that was sort of the start of our one teacher, who's the head of diversity and transformation in the school, basically coming to us, and we had a little group called Speak Your Truth that we'd created, and saying, well, we've noticed that a lot of you want to dress more androgynous and that the uniform is not progressive enough, especially in terms of other body types, because, for example, the skirt did not fit anyone. It was built for a very specific body type, and it hardly fit anyone. The uniforms in general, they weren't made for a diverse group of people. So they were asking us, how can we make this better? How can we make it more inclusive of other body types, of other gender identities, and also in terms of rules for hair? So we should extend the rules of like being allowed to have long hair to male presenting students as well, so that they don't have to have their hair short all the time. And then also the rules in terms of people of color who have not white hair, because these rules are made for people who have white hair. So just changing those and seeing how they could make it more progressive. And yeah.
What is the relationship between gender fluidity, gender neutrality, and the worldwide situation of environmental degradation and collapse? How do those two things link?
Sure. I don't know if I know too much on that. I'm not too sure. I mean, they're both two emerging issues that my generation are very much aware of. I'm not sure if there's a direct link. There's definitely not enough representation in terms of like the climate activists. I've not seen many climate activists who are gender neutral or androgynous in any way. Yeah, I don't see a clear link there. I'm not going to lie to you.
Sure, sure. What role does that, the freedom to present as oneself, what role does that play in individual lives? Perhaps.
The freedom to present as oneself.
Has that been complicated for you, Saber? In the family,
It's not
even the family?
Has it been complicated?
Sure.
As in me presenting like my freedom to present.
And bringing friends home that are preferring pronouns of they and have names that perhaps classic white South African English names are not, you know, they're unfamiliar and people are uncomfortable.
Yeah. So in terms of that, yes, it has, because there are certain people in my life who are not accepting of alternative pronouns, of name changing, or that sort of thing. So it's very difficult when you bring them home, or if you bring them into a certain space and say, hey, this person goes with they, them pronouns, and you might have known them by this name, but they actually prefer to go by that name. There are a lot of people who are simply not accepting of that. And even in school, certain teachers wouldn't understand it, would think that it was stupid, silly. Certain students who didn't understand it. What was worse, though, however, was certain older white teachers just completely not even putting in the effort to pronounce certain names of students of color. There was some student, his name is Cyan, and this lady kept pronouncing his name Shagan. And we always wondered, no, not at all. There's no G in the name. So we always wondered, where does the G come from? Where is she getting the G? And there were certain teachers that just did not put in the effort to try. So my biggest thing is that if you mess up someone's pronoun, if you mess up someone's name, but you are constantly trying to get it right, you're saying, please correct me if I get it wrong. I will do my best. I'm going to go home. I'm going to practice your name. I'm going to practice your pronouns. That is beautiful. That is great. If someone says that to me, even if they're messing up every day, I feel so appreciated. I feel seen. If they're doing it for one of my friends, I'm like, this is beautiful. It really makes me so happy. But if there's absolutely no effort put in to recognize someone else's identity, I just simply think it's not good enough. It's so saddening and so disheartening to think that someone doesn't even want to put in the efforts to appreciate your identity and how you choose to present yourself.
Let me offer an idea about the link between the freedom to present as one wishes and the larger questions. I think our basic problem is that we, humanity, have been sold a false view of how the world works. We have been forced into lanes and restrictions, what it means to be human, what it means to be natural, the role of human beings in the world, that is false and inauthentic. And therefore, the impulse to find our authentic self, whether that be from a gender perspective or from a deeper spiritual perspective, is an important first step toward building the inner strength to then engage in the wider struggle. So it's just an idea. Authenticity, the knowledge of the authentic self, is a critical factor. Let me shift a little bit. Your family, the two of you are members of the same family, and the little I know suggests to me that it is a very supportive and close-knit family, and that you have had the advantage of people who support you in your life choices. And that strikes me as very important for young people facing the world of today. Can you talk a little bit about how your family has supported you in your life?
So I won't get into the nitty-gritty of it, obviously, because it's family. But my family has definitely been a lot more supportive and a lot more accepting than most others. I came out to both of my parents as bisexual and gender fluid, and though they don't necessarily completely understand it, they were completely accepting of it. And they said that you should present yourself however you choose to, and we're going to be completely supportive of that. And it's not that my parents and my family always get my preferred name right. They don't always get my pronouns right. And for them, I excuse it because they've known me by one name and by one set of pronouns for 18 years of my life. And I don't mind if they mess those up, because I know that they still see me and accept me and love me. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. And I know there's a lot of other students here at this university who have not come out to their parents as being of a different gender or a different sexuality, or simply other things like not being religious, that they can't tell their parents about this because they would not be accepted. And it really is quite sad. But I'm grateful that there are certain safe spaces. For example, UP has this thing called Up and Out. To say it's a queer safe space. And I'm grateful that there are spaces like that students can go to.
For me, Saber, this is something that speaks back to our topic that we chose about responsibility, is that you very bravely, I think, stepped up and took responsibility for the choices that you've made in the way of trying to explain it to and educate the family, and try and move us all forward, move the older folk in the family forward into what I believe is a much better way of us being. I think, David, I 100% agree with your analysis that we've put everyone into lanes. A woman is this and has this job, and a man is all these things and has that job. And that's just not really the way that nature works, anything in nature. And yeah, I think you know this, but I mean, I really admire your courage. And I think there's an interesting connection between courage and responsibility. So I'm smiling a bit about the change in the uniforms, that yes, there was this movement in your school to look at uniforms. But the fact that you and Data sort of arrived one day, swapped uniforms and went to school like that. And I'm sure there was some laughing at you and some teachers saying, what the hell are you doing? And you laugh about it now. But I wonder if it was as easy as you say. And this, to me, is the core of activism, where you do these little things.
Yeah, what's interesting, what you said, David, about like society teaching us that certain things are a certain way and putting us in these boxes and these lanes. It brings me back to when I was in matric, so last year, and we were learning about postmodernism in drama. So I don't know how much you guys know about postmodernism, but it is very much like an artistic movement, and we learned about it from a dramatic arts point of view, obviously. But essentially, I can't define postmodernism for you because postmodernism rejects all definitions. And it was really quite amusing, but also very enlightening to see our teacher, who is obviously a generation ahead of us, struggling with this concept and saying that it frustrated her, that she couldn't define it, she couldn't grasp it properly, she couldn't tell us exactly what it is ever. And the students caught onto it so quickly. And I think it was so interesting because it kind of shows me postmodernism is a very new movement, kind of started in the early 2000s, right when we were born. And I think it's because we grew up in a postmodern world and we grew up with this way of thinking. And we have grown up with students around us who are on all different spectrums of gender and sexuality, on mental health and all this. So we live in a world in which there is not necessarily a single definition for a person, that they can be many different things at once. They can be many different places on a spectrum. So yeah, we've grown up in a world where we've seen that there aren't boxes that fit every single person. You can't put yourself in any single box. So we grasped onto this concept of postmodernism so much quicker than what previous generations have. And even when I tried to explain it to my mom, she was like, it just doesn't make it doesn't make sense. And I'm saying, no, but it does. Like, it really does. And I love learning about postmodernism because I think it's so perfectly encapsulated so much of my generation and just how we are becoming more and more accepting of this fluidity in identity.
That's very interesting.
It is.
Do you find it comfortable to live in, excuse me, do you find it comfortable to live in a world where there's no single definition of truth and no single way that you know you're supposed to go? Is that comfortable?
For me, it is at times very scary, because I think a lot of people often just, they want to be told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and just sort of go along with that because it is comfortable and you don't have to think too much about it. And that's very much what my school experience was like. And now that I'm out of school and trying to figure out what I want to do now, what I want to study at university, which university I want to go to, now I have to start asking those bigger questions. But I do also like the freedom that it gives you, that you are also allowed to sort of define your own truth. And there doesn't necessarily have to be this absolute truth, that you can figure it out for yourself. As terrifying as it is, I think it's also very important that one does figure out what their truth is, and how they want to live that.
Wendy, is there something else that you would like to bring up right now?
I think there's a link, an interesting link here about postmodernism, because that's also, and this is not a subject matter that I'm familiar with, but people that I know talk about postmodernism in the economic and political sense as well. And I suspect from what you're saying, Saber, that while probably the professors of that subject matter in universities around the world are people my age, I wonder what they're teaching, because I wonder if someone with my cultural background, so what I've been told from a small child to where I am now, as the truth and the important things and the facts and the way I need to live, I wonder if I'm able to unpack that enough to actually be in a postmodern world as a participating person who's taking it forward, instead of someone who keeps harking back to an old way of being. So for me, this really defines where the big generation gap, I mean, such a cliched saying, but where the really huge generation gap for me seems to be, is that while I really try and I'm really keen to be able to use the language and support young people, I don't know if I can see the way forward as clearly as you can and will do in the future. You know, whatever it is that you study and whatever it is that you bring to the world, I think you have an ability to see the possibilities that my colonized self, in a way, is unable to see out of my little box that I'm in. And I don't know that that's a question. I mean, I think it is the generation gap that we don't seem to be able to address. And I think it's just a human thing. We're brought up in a certain way, and that's how I am. You know, I use he, she pronouns. And when someone introduces they pronouns, it's like I'm familiar with that now, but it's like, for some people, it's like so foreign, you know?
Yeah, I think there's generational gaps between each generation, of course. And it is also something that we discussed in a couple of subjects at school. Shame, sorry, someone's trying to get into the room. But I don't necessarily think it's a problem. I think it's always just very interesting to see the younger generations teaching other generations about how they want to move forward. Like, for example, the Soweto riots, which were a big part of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa in the 70s. But that was run by high school students. And it lasted for about a year. So I think every generation around sort of the age that I'm in, between like 16 to 25, that group, they are very big change makers, and they sort of set the stage for how things are going to be for their generation. And I think it's a very important part of their life, and they always bring something new to the world at that point in time. And I don't know what it's like to be one of the older generations, sort of looking at it and going, well, that's not sort of how we did things, but okay, I guess I'll try to catch on. I don't know what that's like, of course. But yeah, there's always a gap. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, though, and I think it's good actually for the younger generation to teach others how they sort of want things to be done.
And I wonder, David, if that brings us back to our core subject matter around responsibility. I'm sort of speaking for you, but we know that you're trying to find your way in terms of what you're going to study. Do you feel a big weight of responsibility in terms of making the right choices now? Because there are all these possibilities of creating change in a world that desperately needs change. And I say world, I mean the human world. And nature needs us to make change because the way we're living is just not sustainable. So there's this knowing how bad it is and knowing you've got this hopefully long future ahead of you, making a choice now about how you enter into that future. Do you feel that there's quite a big responsibility?
It's definitely a big responsibility, but it's a frustrating one because for me, it was one that was thrust upon us in a very harsh manner. And I know that each generation has different responsibilities that they grow up with, that they have to take on, be it fighting sexism or anti-LGBTQ rights, whatever it might be. This one is just that much more daunting because it means the demise of the world entirely. I think it's a lot. It's a lot to take on. It's a big responsibility, and it's frustrating because it's like we didn't do it, which doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything about it now. We should definitely do whatever part we can to try change the status quo. But yeah, it's just a scary one. I think that's all I can say. It's a scary one. It's a daunting one, and I hate the word, but it feels unfair.
Sure. And is there anything that you've thought about? I mean, I don't want to land you with a big responsibility here of changing the world or ruling the world. We did talk about that briefly before. But is there anything that you can think of that people my age can help you with? How can we best support you in making your choices and in moving forward, bringing about change?
I think I might have said this before, but like giving a voice and giving a platform to the youth. But at the same time, when it comes to specifically the climate crisis, it is unfortunately like the everyday person, there's actually very little that they can do. You can be vegan, you can go zero waste, you can do all these things. But at the end of the day, you need to call upon bigger corporations and governments and these multinational companies and ask them, what is your role in this climate crisis? How much are you contributing to it? And we need you to stop because actually you're killing our world. So it's about calling on them more than anything else. I think the best way to support the youth is helping to ensure that they actually have a future to look forward to by calling on these bigger governments and multinational companies and saying, hey guys, we actually need to change things because it's not okay.
Unbelievably, we are nearing the end of our time together today. Thank you so much for being with us, Saber. I'd like to ask finally, in the face of the problems that we've talked about and your very serious approach to them, are you enjoying life now?
Interesting question. I am. I do want to say that I am. Obviously, there are, aside from personal issues and other stuff, I do enjoy life. And I think that's part of what makes me so fiercely passionate about wanting to save it and wanting to help the environment and do whatever I can to make sure that we actually have a world to live on in 10, 20, 30 years time. Is that I do actually enjoy life, and I want others to enjoy it as much as I do, and I want others to have the privileges that I do and the luxuries I do. And they can't do that if they don't have a world to live on. They can't do that if Elon Musk and his mates are going to Mars and leaving the rest of us up in flames. So yeah, I do enjoy life, and I want others to enjoy it as well.
Wendy, are you enjoying life?
I am enjoying life, very much so, definitely. But that word unfair, and I know, Saber, that you don't push it all on us. But the word unfair sits with me a lot in terms of the privileges that I've had that I've taken for granted, where we've used stuff up. We've actually used stuff up without, and perhaps in excuse, we all say, well, we didn't know. But I think for a long time now we have known. And really, it feels to me like it's time that my generation step back quite a lot from the controls and hand a lot more of the controls over and bring young people up onto those platforms however we can, so that we hear what postmodernism is, so that maybe we can start to learn to fit in with that. But also that we provide you with resources, you know, with money and with access to the stuff you need, to the ears of politicians, for example. I hear you, definitely.
Last word to you, Saber. Do you have anything in particular to say to me, my generation, the older folks that you have to deal with? You have a message for us?
It's quite a lot of you out there, but if I had to sum it up in a few sentences, I think it's not about dwelling on what you might think of as your past mistakes, whether you were terribly racist or if you littered every day of your life in the past. I don't think you shouldn't spend your days dwelling on that, because it's not going to do anything. And guilt is a very stagnant emotion. It does nothing. It's about saying, okay, like accepting your past, whatever it might be, whether you were actually part of many liberal movements or whether you were fighting against them, kind of seeing what have you done with your life and how can you help the youth enjoy their life, and how can you help them do what they want to do with their lives, if that is something that you would like to do, I think.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us, Saber Freeman from Pretoria, South Africa, and Wendy Freeman, Saber's aunt, from Portugal. I am David Baum in Seattle. This is Collapse Club. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell. Until we meet again, farewell.
Bye.